In recent weeks have I found myself frequently in an awareness position and view which bridges between the real side and the physical level. The physical vehicle is the equivalent of a virtual reality headset, where the ideas that comprise the physical level are afforded as a simulation to be experienced. And when we sleep, we shift our awareness view from the physical vehicle to multi-dimensional creation beyond, as though removing the virtual reality headset and having the option of viewing whatever is transpiring throughout creation, or that which the guides wish to reveal to us. We can, however, operate in a position where we don't fully vacate our view from the physical body apparatus, where we are rather lingering between the real side and the physical level, a state referred to as hypnagogia, but that I refer to as the in-between state. With this state maintained, so we will have a simultaneous view of where we happen to be on the physical, but also will certain features seep over from the real side, that were we on the real side fully, these features would be present in their associated environments or settings there. As I mentioned on previous shares, this is a state that for me occurs of its own volition, as though automatic, stemming from my days when I would practice such. I tend not consciously choose to operate in such states nowadays, but when I happen to find myself in them, and I am receiving interesting real side bleedovers, particularly other beings and body forms, I tend to maintain this state until I have gleaned or been made aware of all that I can from the experience. As I have concluded, the guides utilize this occasionally automatic in-between state to isolate certain features that I need be aware of, or to allow certain beings to manifest, as it were. Some beings will additionally make their presence known of their own free will accord, many of which will carry out acts of skullduggery in various forms, as I have over the years shared, adversely impacting me in actuality from the real side, but through this in-between state position, they are as though present in my bedroom on the physical. As I said, it's as though I am finding myself in this in-between state rather regularly of late, and on this occasion would be present a real side bleed over that consisted of what I can best describe as an energy beam of some kind. It was impacting me from the right side, as though passing through the very walls. It was a dark force attacking effort of some kind, as impressions suggested, and in reality then its source of origin would be from another dimension. It must be stressed that adverse impact that is unseen, stemming from the other dimensions of life, are in no way less effective just because we can't perceive them from the physical level, and what would present as obstacles physical level-wise do not apply to features, beings and technologies operating from other creational dimensional positions. hence why on such occasions beings may appear as though semi-embedded in the walls, the floor, or in this case, these beams of energy passing through the very wall of my room. They are comprised of a series of glowing blue concentric rings, and would impact my physical level body. As I said, my impressions were that the purpose of this was nefarious, although, unlike on other occasions where similar has occurred, nothing untoward seemed to happen, at least not detrimentally and in that moment. But my reaction, however, was curious. It must be remembered that this in-between state position is maintained by placing aside the consciousness of thought and emotion, the personal self, in other words, and so we are very much operating from a real awareness nowness position. As such, just as it is on the real side, the real awareness takes the reins, as it were. The personal self just sits back and observes without interference, as the real awareness is able to draw upon the entirety of everything available to it, as it is a part of this everything reality that is animating through all consciousness, and as such, nothing is beyond its abilities in regards to the simulated body forms it animates, assuming the personal self stays out of the way. And so here would it utilize my simulated body form to as though communicate with whatever was behind the energy beamers and whatever purpose they served, as I found myself speaking in an alien language of some description. I would be doing so out loud and on the physical. So were anyone within a physical level earshot, they would have heard me, but would not have seen the energy beamers, as these would be other dimensionally placed beyond the simulation of the physical level as experienced through their physical level vehicles. Whatever language the real awareness was using my simulated body form to communicate with the alien beings with, those that were instigating this situation, resulted in the termination of the energy beamers that were impacting my physical body. No impressions did I receive as to the purpose of the beamers, although that the real awareness felt it prudent to bring a halt to such, suggested they were not especially beneficial. I would move my view now fully onto the real side, vacating the physical body and in between state position. Part of the process of awareness is the facing of the created consciousness, the idea agreements and attachments, and as they are revealed to us, so we then decide their release. For to hold to any of our created idea agreements, and we resign ourselves to positions where they can be experienced, that being a creation. If we endeavour to stand as the real light awareness beings we are, as this isness a true reality, the releasing of all created ideas is a must, as it is the clinging to these ideas that limit us from our true being positions. Constantly then is this a process, that of facing and releasing the consciousness idea construct taking place, as we maintain the intent to do so, the real intent for is recognition, which will have then this process of facing the self and creation as rather automatic, assuming the intent is held to. And occasionally the personal self may be shown the simulation of this process on the real side. For as we face the ideas, we tend experience the simulated replay of the lifetimes and circumstances where the ideas were originally agreed with and consciousness installed. As you might imagine then, not all of the simulation in association with the agreements will make sense to the personal self if you consider that the bulk of the consciousness, the subconscious, will comprise of every lifetime of agreements since we initially entered the simulator, and would the kind of agreements forged in alien worlds, for example, be understandable in relation to the comparable references the personal self can draw upon, the comparable experiences of the current lifetime creational position and species. We then rather need lean to the real awareness impressions to illuminate the personal self as to the details, or at least the themes, but then, if such experiences are of the releasing of these agreements, the simulation associated with them is really very secondary, and we need not overly concern ourselves with deciphering it in any great meticulous detail. On this occasion, then, I was with a group of other individuals on their respective awareness processes, impressions revealing they too were facing and releasing certain agreements, and that we all were featuring in the same situation as it visually presented itself, suggested the same or similar agreements we shared in relation to each other. The scene presented as though that of a nightmarish, hellish realm, as I said, simulation in association with the nature of the ideas being released, and so indicating the kind of ideas we were facing. For we all have experienced quite the array of lifetimes and body forms, made the various choices we have, assuming the roles as the villains and the good guys, but ultimately all as idea agreements that are just as creationally binding and limiting. The entirety of the consciousness retaining all agreements we ever have installed that require releasing, irrespective of their nature or of our being conscious of them or not. I have come to determine that if an experience presents as a progression in some form, that we are constantly moving forward through adversity or opposition, this indicates whatever the nature of the experience is, whatever purpose it serves, is being accomplished as we continuously proceed forwards. Oftentimes, if we seek agreement from certain beings or body types, the success of our efforts is represented in this way. Resistance in any form, then, is the reluctance of the target individual to extend agreement. But as we overcome the resistance, and if we reach the goal, as it were, this indicates agreement secured. On occasion, these agreement-facing and releasing experiences are presented in the same way, as a kind of a gauntlet, or series of obstacles to be overcome, and the nature of the resistance the form it takes, indicates the kind of idea agreements we are dealing with. And just like where we are seeking to secure agreements from others where we meet resistance, it is more the resistance of the personal self in regards to the releasing of the ideas we are facing at that moment. And should we successfully reach the end of the gauntlet or series of chambers, or overcome all obstacles, this reveals the agreement is fully worked through and let go of. On other occasions, we simply have a past lifetime reruns that were the situations where the idea agreements we were releasing were originally consciousness installed, as I said. But here, in this experience, would the group and myself be navigating through a gauntlet of a kind, comprising of a twisted metal and debris, the environment dark and oppressive. And were it not for the real awareness impressions, the personal self alone may not have recognized what was taking place, that this was an agreement facing and releasing experience. But then, if we were as the isolated personal self, with no intention of becoming real, that which we actually are, we would not be having such experiences. We certainly wouldn't be facing and releasing the ideas of the consciousness. Many of the ideas we have installed over our lifetimes will have an emotional component to them, which enhances them and makes them harder to release. What tends to happen is, as we face these ideas from lifetimes past, the body forms we operated in, and our prior thrill-seeking indulgences, that up until that moment, even though they would be subconsciously placed, and despite being unconscious of them, still affecting their nature until released, that we are unconscious of them, so the thrill that these past ideas afforded us will be beyond our conscious considerations. But as we face these ideas, as we are reacquainted with them, we also re-experience the emotions associated with the choices we made and agreements we consciously installed, as though being reintroduced to a long-forgotten lover, and the passion is momentarily rekindled. An alcoholic would endeavour to stay away from even the sight of a bottle of beer, as he runs the risk of reigniting his want for it. However, the facing of the consciousness demands a reacquainting with the ideas and thrill-seeking agreement choices we made throughout our lifetimes, and very often I have found that as I am reintroduced to these old lifetimes, I can be swept away by them, the ideas of them, for a certain duration, even weeks at a time, and then eventually can I fully let go of the ideas that had been faced on the real side, experience the sense of their release, etc. As I said, as the group and I proceeded, that we were making progress indicated that we were constant in our intent to fully face and release whatever the idea agreements were, expressed as this realm of darkness and twisted metal. And at a certain moment, barbed wire would emerge from the surrounding metal and bind our limbs. This I construed as representing a tap lining. That it was of such a severe form, further indicating the kind of agreements we were dealing with and facing. But tap lines only can bind if we maintain them, if we cling to the ideas that they represent, and with our intent to release these agreements maintained, so we forged ahead, dragging ourselves through the snaring barbed wire that tore at our bodies and clothing. As I was saying earlier, as we face these agreements, many of which can be rather convoluted, as we tend to build upon certain ideas, and as lifetimes go by, their roots go deep, and there may be certain aspects of them harder to release than others, that certain idea branches associated with the overall idea being faced carry a greater emotional component than others. As such, we might construe these as temptations that we would endeavour not to be drawn into, as though certain of the branches contained apples, to use a biblical analogy. For at a certain point I would stop. I had the sense that although the group and I had made good progress, as we continued to dismantle this particular agreement and all its associated idea offshoots, that there was a part of it I would not be able to face at that moment, and that if I were to attempt to do so, I would be sucked into the temptation of it, that although ultimately we must release all ideas of the consciousness, if we want to stand as the real light beings we are, absent of creational necessity, certain ideas are harder to release than others, and it's all about timing. In these experiences, we will have the sense to either proceed or not, and maybe at a later moment we will complete the releasing of the particular idea. As an example, for the alcoholic to be fully liberated from his need to drink, ultimately he would be able to walk into drinking establishments devoid of temptation, but to try such too soon would be ill-advised, as he runs the risk of being sucked back into these old habits, and rather setting himself back as it were. And although the sense of a disappointment that I couldn't complete this particular idea-releasing exercise, the overall impression was this was as far as I could go with it at that moment. I could have pushed forwards despite this, but then, whatever the nature of the idea aspect, was far too strong for my personal self at that moment, whatever it may have been. But naturally, if my intent remains with the ears, everything of the consciousness will be faced and released, and only if we decide will this process stop. And so, I was removed from the scene, the group would remain, and I was now in the company of what impressions revealed was a real guide, and he would be affording support and encouragement, that ultimately the choices and intents are mine to establish, but the guides surely do see the struggle we all face as we continue to drag ourselves through the process of creation, a painstaking process to be sure, hell and high water, as DUANE often refers to it as, and there the experience would end.
Hey Kevin, that was good. That's fun. So another adventure here, young man. Thank you so much. Yes. Pretty self-explanatory. So we just keep going on to see what happens next on the earth and in creation. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you.